Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positron.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I want to talk about the latest episode of Picard Season 2. It was called Fly Me to the Moon. And you guys, not good. Let's talk about it. As it begins, we see Renee Picard. No, not that one. That's the one. They couldn't even be original with the name. Anyway, experiences some trouble in her ship, which turns out to be a simulator. Meanwhile, Admiral Picard meets Talon, the Watcher, not Laris, and not, as some fans had suspected, Isis, which would have been Gary Seven's cat from an original series episode, which in this case would have anthropomorphized itself, which would have been cool. Who has a really bad American accent and who explains that she has dedicated herself to protecting Renee Picard. And the dialogue in this scene was extremely clunky and I want to say pedantic, and just, it didn't flow. It was like clunky. And it's goofy as hell that this character looks like Laris. And why does she look like Laris? Because if they didn't make her look like Laris, the actress that plays Laris would not have had anything to do this season. So they gave her this part. At least that's how it looks for now. I mean, something could change where, oh, that's why she looked like. But for now, that's what it would appear to be, and that is extremely stupid. Now, during this conversation, when not Laris tells Picard why she's there and what she does, he says, oh, kind of like that one operative, Gary Seven, that Kirk ran into. And I'm thinking, okay, she's going to say yes. Gary Seven was a fellow operative of mine, and I work with the same agency, or I'm from the same group of individuals. And yes, Gary Seven. She just goes, oh, okay. So there's no comment one way or the other whether Gary Seven has anything to do with what she does or who she is. And so you're left thinking like that she's a completely different kind of timeline protector that has no connection to Gary Seven and whatever he did. And that's fine, but like, then why mention it? Why bring it up? It's just to name drop. It's pure quote unquote fan service. It's a member berry. And it's annoying. Like, just say, yes, Gary Seven, right. Same thing, me. No, they don't say that at all. She just seems not to know what the hell he's talking about. And it's dumb. Why? Why would you do that? I'll do you one better. Not only is it dumb that she looks like Laris, but it's dumb that it's not Gary Seven. Like, how cool would it have been if the Watcher were Gary frickin' Seven, seeing as they frickin' mentioned him and are obviously aware of him? And by they, I mean the writers. Why didn't they do that? Obviously, it couldn't be the same actor because he's either dead or way too old looking. I don't happen to know. But it could have been another actor. As it is, they have to explain why she looks like a different person. Why would you not explain why would they not be willing to explain why Gary Seven looks different? Or say that Gary Seven is a name like Agent J or Agent K or the Dread Pirate Roberts that passes down from operative to operative, or like 007 is a number that can be assigned to different agents in the British Secret Service within the James Bond universe. So stupid. And you know what else? If they didn't want to recast the Gary Seven part, you know what they could have done? They could have got Terry Garr and have come up with some story why after the events of that original series episode, she went into the same service as Gary Seven was in, or I'm trying to remember if he's an alien. I don't know. Maybe she would have needed to be an alien, and how would they have explained that? I don't know, but like, could they not have worked something out where they used Terry Garr, who is alive and still acting, to my knowledge. Like, how cool would that have been? Do they do that? Nope. And, you know, I thought the first two episodes of this season were really good. I thought the next couple episodes were decent. This one went off the rails, and that's why I'm flipping out. Whereas I wasn't flipping out over the previous episode. I didn't see all these crazy, stupid things, although there were a bunch that I now know, thanks to fellow YouTuber, the nitpicking nerd. But yeah, just so right off the bat for a few minutes, I'm like displeased. Okay. So next, what do we see? We see the Borg Queen aboard the La Sirena accessing the computer by voice and calling the cops to the vineyard. Now, why would she be left alone? Why would she be allowed to speak when they didn't need to talk to her? It's just ridiculous. So she calls the cops to the vineyard. Okay, whatever. It turns out now that apparently Seven and Rafi can, in fact, transport Rios off the bus, even though he doesn't have his communicator. And Rafi wants to do this, but Seven demands that she don't do it in order to not mess up the timeline by showing people someone being transported off the bus. In another scene with super clunky dialogue, all their dialogue between them has been clunky this whole season. And it's to the point where you just see the actors like forcing it. The stuff they're saying doesn't feel natural to the characters, and they know this, or natural to people who would be in that situation. I mean, I don't know. It's just, and you can just see like them trying to act through the dialogue, which is never good. Anyway, Seven says, no, we're not gonna do that. She uses the tricorder instead to somehow send out what appeared to be like an electromagnetic pulse, which disables the bus and stops it in its tracks. And then they go on and physically rescue Rios after stunning the bus driver guard and the other guard or whatever. And when they do this, they not only allow all the other people on the bus to get off and go wherever by simply not stopping them. No, they go a step further than that. They cut the zip ties on every one of the people on the bus as they're leaving, which means they willfully and intentionally let all these people get off the bus and just run wherever. And, you know, I understand the impulse to like be kind to these people who are being deported at best and disappeared at worst. But not 2 minutes before, Seven was telling Rafi, we have to protect the timeline. So let's let a bunch of people off the bus and run around free who probably still would have been deported or disappeared, even if we made off with Rios, once the guards came to and called for help. So they had to know that that was messing up the timeline, that those people would still have got, even though they stopped but you know what I mean? Like, it's insane that they did that. I mean, you know, again, you can see where they might say, geez, are we really gonna leave these people on the bus to the mercy of these people who aren't very nice? But the answer is yes. Kirk let Edith Keeler die right in front of him to protect history. That's what you do. You let people's fate befall them, whatever it might be, even though it's yucky, even though it makes you feel bad to do it, but that's what you do. That's how you protect the timeline. The timeline comes first. And it would be fine if they didn't sort of know that, but we know they know that. They knew it 2 minutes before. So what the hell was that? We go back to Talon, and she explains that while Renee Picard is a bit of a prodigy, she also suffers from depression and other sort of mental instabilities. And I found this whole part to be clunky as well. It was just discussed in a very detached, clinical way by two characters that are third parties to it, that are witnesses of it, as opposed to it being depicted that she's that way in any real way by scenes where she actually is coping through life and talking about the experience herself, as we've seen done countless times on Star Trek when characters have had you know, psycho-emotional struggles. But they reduced it to two other characters saying, yeah, she's kind of messed up, and we've got to prevent Q from leveraging that to make the mission not succeed. I mean, and for a brief minute, she's talking about her feelings in a clip, because Talon shows Picard part of her therapy session, in which Q is masquerading as a therapist, and I shit you not, using a Freud-like Austrian accent, which ridiculous. And he tells her maybe she's not ready to be a rocket pilot based on things that she's telling him about her mental state, which was in fact quite alarming, quite an alarming thing for an astronaut 3 days from a mission launch to say. And Picard seems to be upset that Q's saying this to her and trying to talk her out of, doing the mission, and that he's changing history by doing that, by going about it that way. And I was thinking, damn straight he's talking her out of it. She's got issues. She should probably not be piloting a rocket ship in 3 days. So why was he so outraged? And the other thing about the two is these astronauts in real life go through psych evals. And so this particular session with Q is not unrealistic, and there might even have been one 3 days before the launch, but there would have been others before that. They wouldn't get 3 days before launch and not know she was kind of struggling. So the next thing we see is Adam Sung addressing some kind of regulatory board, because apparently he's been doing experiments that are medically unethical, and he's been doing them on his daughter, who of course looks exactly like Soji. And apparently she can't go outside because UV light affects her blood in a way that is poisonous to her, which is fine. It was interesting because Leah Thompson, who directed, I guess, the previous episode, was one of the board members. But he then goes home and someone contacts him over his computer and sends something to his 3D printer, and it's a card with the letter Q printed into it, which is weird because how would Q, he would have had to figure out a way to do that through conventional means, since he doesn't have his magic, which also somehow didn't stop him from making himself Renee's therapist. Like, what? So a lone cop shows up at the vineyard, and he comes across the La Serena in the vineyard because he was shining his light around looking for the trouble that he was called to look into, and he catches a glimmer of the cloaking device, which of course is ridiculous. But then he somehow finds the door, and in a completely nonsensical move, heads inside alone, which he's able to do because security isn't a thing. The door is just left open, and there's no alarm that goes off. There's no lockdown that occurs, nothing. He's just able to go on and walk around. And of course, he encounters the Queen, who's able to grab him. And it's funny because apparently she worked out that luring the police there would bring, first of all, one guy as opposed to a bunch of guys, and that he would find the ship. Like, what? What? How could she have possibly counted on that? We go back to Dr. Sung, and he goes to meet Q because that's who sent him the card, obviously. And he distrusts Q at first, but then Q worms his way into his good graces by quoting, among other things, Oppenheimer, and by giving him a liquid that fixes his daughter's situation, but only temporarily. Picard then plans with Talon to look in on Renee at a gala she's going to be attending. And this was yet another scene with super clunky dialogue. These writers are so bad. The Borg Queen then holds the cop hostage, threatening to kill him in an attempt to convince Agnes to allow herself to be assimilated. But Agnes fires a shotgun now from the villa, not a phaser from the ship. She goes with a shotgun, okay, but then when she gets to the ship, she doesn't grab a phaser? Like, really? And it, of course, kills the Queen, rather than allowing the Queen to assimilate the guy or her. because she said if she couldn't have Agnes, she'd assimilate him so she could essentially walk around through, through him. And instead of stunning her, well, why? Because they need to kill the queen because it's a plot device. So anyway, Agnes is able to repair the damage that the queen did to the cop and also erase his memory with some kind of a medication or a treatment, which begs the question, why weren't they all carrying some of this in case people saw them do stuff? Like futuristic stuff? The way MIB agents carry the little flashy things? When Picard gets back to the ship with Talon and he's reunited with everyone, he refers to the crew when talking to Talon about them as such a great crew, that they're the best, greatest bunch of people you could work with. And it's like, no, no, that's a different crew. So anyway, now the plan is to infiltrate this gala so they can keep an eye on Renee, who Q is just allowing to walk around, even though he could have grabbed her or poisoned her or killed her, to prevent the launch. And they're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way because it's a special kind of gala where everybody who was invited is in a database and everybody's face is constantly monitored once they're inside to make sure that even if somebody does get past security, they would be discovered. So the team cannot transport in. They have to get themselves into the system, which of course they can only do on site because the whole system is air gapped. But they're going to be able to get on site to do this because Talon can force one and only one ID into the air gapped system using her technology so that Agnes can go in and get to the computer and put them all in so they can all get in. And then Agnes is, of course, immediately figured out because security sees her on the monitors talking to herself, seeming to talk to herself while she's communicating with the others. And this, of course, is immediate cause for alarm, even though if they were concerned about people communicating to others outside or even at the party, secretly, quote unquote, they'd be monitoring communications, which isn't to say that they would have picked up what she was saying because it's future tech, but they would then have said, hey, she can't be talking to someone else because we're not picking it up. But they don't mention that at all. They just immediately assume she's talking to herself. She must be talking to someone that we don't want her talking to from inside. So they go and grab her, but it turns out that having Agnes get discovered is what the team was planning the whole time to get her into the surveillance room. Then we get a flashback to the Borg Queen dying from the gunshot, which apparently Agnes could feel because they'd been connected before. And even with her dying breath, the Queen still tries to talk Agnes into allowing herself to be assimilated. And while she's doing that, she touches her face and seemingly inserts herself, her consciousness, into Agnes's mind fully, which Agnes has not disclosed to the team. But I'm thinking this is how they're going to get home now, because of course she realizes as soon as she kills the Borg Queen that now they have no way home. But I think what's going to end up happening is Agnes is going to be able to do the computer computations and all that stuff that the Borg Queen did to get them there. And that's going to enable them to go back because there is no other way for them to get back without inventing something new. And on that note, I want to say how dumb this is because nobody says out loud what you would think they had to be thinking when they found out the Borg Queen was dead, which is, holy crap, we're not going to be able to get home. And then somebody saying, well, you know what? We're going to try to get home anyway, some other way. But if we can't, damn it, at least we're fixing the timeline and that's all that matters. Nobody brings it up. It's not mentioned, which is completely unrealistic. This episode is just bad. As I said, the first two were pretty good. The next two were okay. This episode's horrible. The dialogue was extremely clunky, and if I'm honest, it has been between Seven and Rafi the whole time. The plot construction is very obvious plot construction. Like, you can see the constructs in the plot that they've contrived into the story so that they can have the kind of scenes that they want, but it's very obviously like setup after setup after setup that they have to explain through clunky dialogue that just doesn't, it's bad. It's really bad. Like the gala infiltration scene that they've now set up for the next episode is that scene from every thriller movie or every spy movie we've ever seen, where the good guy or the good guy team dresses all up and each member slaps in an earwig and goes to a party and they split up and then they talk to each other about how they're going to sneak into the safe room or sneak into the data room or sneak into the back room to rescue the hostage, whatever it is. And this scene is just slapped in there to give the characters something to do for an episode, to stretch the story out to 10 episodes. And to give the sequence added drama, they concocted a scenario where, well, we can't beam in, and then we can't infiltrate the system from outside, and I can only get one person in, and then these contrivances that don't make that you have to sit there and go, really? You can get one person in the system, but you can't get 6? How convenient for the plot. Really? It's air gapped? Oh, how convenient for the plot. Like, really? It's all giant contrivance. It's a far-fetched obstacle that they put in there, they pulled out of their asses and put in the story so that they could make the scene complex enough to give the cast something to do. And you can just see the wheels turning in the writers' heads about, okay, how are we going to make it so they can't just beam in? Because that would be too quick. And how are we going to make it so that the scene takes 15 minutes instead of 2? And when the writing is that obvious, it's bad. Never mind the fact that with this episode, we finally see what causes the divergence. And it's a super original idea of an important rocket launch that absolutely must happen so that the future as we know it from Star Trek can exist. You know, basically the plot of the original series episode that Gary 7 was in, as well as the plot of First Contact. And it's like, really? You're dusting off the we have to make sure this rocket launch occurs plot? Like, really? Really? That's the thing? The only good things about this episode were Brent Spiner, who did the best job out of all the cast with the stupid dialogue, because even his dialogue isn't great, but it comes off better from him for some reason. And the other good thing was John Delancey, who is just as good at playing Q here as he's always been, and who thankfully they gave good lines to. But even that didn't stop them from messing up Q, because here he is without powers, right? But again, as I was saying before, he's trying to prevent this launch from happening. And how does he go about that? By doubt seeding the person that he wants to not carry out the mission. By harassing her over her self-doubt and anxieties and whatnot to get her to drop out and not go on the mission or to mess up the mission. Instead of, like, during the therapy session when he was right there, grabbing her and locking in her a closet for 3 days. Like, you're in the room with her and you don't want her to go on the mission. Why are you pussyfooting around with this whole thing about trying to get her to fail by messing with her head? Like, just hit her with a poison needle and knock her out, and or kill her, or really? He's just gonna nag her about her insecurities and her mental frailties until she doesn't go on the mission? It's ridiculous. And nobody talks about, oh, how did the Borg Queen get the cop here? And how did the cop find the ship? And nobody says, if she did that, maybe she did other things. Maybe we should review the footage, at which point they would see Agnes being semi-assimilated or whatever. Nope. It doesn't occur to them. This episode is horrible. Next week, I think, is going to be worse because there's going to be more stupid contrivances. In this episode, we do see back to Q, say to Dr. Sung that he'll give him the cure for his daughter that's permanent if Sung helps him take out an obstacle or whatever. So he is kind of saying, like, okay, I'm not just going to talk to her about a mental condition. I'm actually going to take some kind of action. We don't know what that is. But even there, why go through a proxy? You were in the room with the person that you want to not go on the mission. Why haven't, like, what? Bad episode, clunky dialogue, stupid plot contrivances that you can see. The writers building in their head, step by step, almost working backwards, because this is where they want to get. So how do we contrive a bunch of bullshit to make that happen? It's a recycling of the old Star Trek episode from the original series and First Contact. We've seen it before. They couldn't even, like I said, come up with a different name. She's Renee Picard. Really bad. I made my thumbnail for this video, my original thumbnail for this video before I saw the episode, because I like to make the thumbnails. And so I made a really cool one. But I didn't use it because my thumbnail is cooler than this episode. My thumbnail is better than this episode. This episode does not deserve my cool thumbnail. So I remade a thumbnail that's crappy. Because that's what this episode deserves, a crappy thumbnail. So this episode is horrible. I am going to be back with a review of the next episode. Until then, I wish you all peace and long life.